Hey guys, it's me again. So, yesterday I ended my video with my first bout with mental institution when I was 18. But what I forgot to include was a little important section. And that was when I graduated high school, I moved in with my sister, which was the first time that I actually really lived in Nashville. She helped me get a job, gave me a place to live, and what did she get in return? She got her little sister who was going behind her back and doing substances, taking off with people that I had no clue really who they were. It's a miracle that she showed up one day when she did, because God only knows what would happen to me. But I got pretty bad on substances when I was living with her, and she took me back to my mom's, which is how I ended up in the hospital, because I did not tell a soul what I had been doing. There was like one person, two max, in the whole world that knew what I was doing. And I really thought that I had burnt that bridge with her. We've always had a complicated relationship anyway. But at that point, I really thought that I'd screwed things up. But now, let's fast forward a little bit. When I got out of the mental hospital, I moved in with a guy that I had met prior to me going into rehab, well, the mental hospital. And everything was okay for a couple months. And then he started becoming abusive, to the point that he told me he was going to take me to where he was from, which was Arkansas, and unalive me. At this point, I devised a plan to get away from him. And he was on probation. So I knew that anything that I did to bring attention to him could, set me free. Send him back to prison and set me free. So that's what I did. I went to my mom's. I made a phone call to a friend telling them what was going on. And then I proceeded to go into my mother's room and steal enough jewelry from her to catch myself a felony. Then I went to Asheville. I talked him into going to the pawn shop with the jewelry and pawning it. While he was in the pawn shop, I made a plan to get out. When he came back to the vehicle, I told him that I was not going anywhere with him, that I was meeting up with somebody, my sister, I believe is what I told him, at a restaurant in Asheville. So he dropped me off. He again threatened to unalive me. At this point, I called my sister, who got in touch with my mother, who got in touch with his probation officer. And he was arrested by the time he hit the county line. And I knew at this point that that was my chance to get free, which is exactly what I did. Now, I wasn't totally free because I ended up getting put on probation. My felony was dropped to a misdemeanor, but I got put on probation, and I moved back in with my parents. Despite everything that I have done to my parents, they were still willing to open their home to me. To this day, I'll forever be grateful. But, yeah, so I stayed there for a few months, and I got really, really bored. So I started going with my dad. He bowled at the bowling alley, a couple of times a week, once a week, something like that. But anyway, I started going with him, and that is where I met another guy. This guy ended up becoming my first husband. Now, I remember the process of why I got married, which was to get out of my mother's house. And being on probation, I thought that was the only way I could do it, was to get married to somebody that, honest to God, I really did not know very well. I remember the day that I left. I remember going and talking to my probation officer. But what I don't remember is the actual wedding ceremony or anything for a week afterward. At this time, I was heavily addicted to everything that my psychiatrists were prescribing me, as well as anything else I could get my hands on. So, here I was, married, um, homeless. Yes, I could have went back to my parents at any given moment, but by this point, I was ashamed. Um, I turned into somebody that I didn't even know. Um, at one point, we got into a wreck, which only made the addiction worse because I got prescribed more pain pills, which comatose me for the better part of a whole summer. During this time, I would make phone calls to my mother, my sisters, and cuss them out. Say horrible, god awful things that I don't remember. I've been told over the years the things I've said. And, if at any given point I could go and take it all back, I would. But nonetheless, I did it. That was the summer that Katrina happened. And when Katrina happened, I went back home to my parents because I did not like being homeless in all that rain. That went, on and off for a little while. But in December of that year, I had got tired of being on the streets. And here it was becoming, it was cold weather. I was hungry. At this point, I literally weighed 98 pounds. 89, 98, 98. 98 pounds is what I weighed when I walked into the county jail. Because in January of the next year, I went to jail. I activated my sentence. I did 31 of 45 days. When I got out on February 18th of that year, my beautiful, wonderful mother was waiting for me at the end of the hallway. I can't express how much gratitude I had that she hadn't given up on me. Of course I knew she hadn't given up on me. She had came to see me as much as she possibly could while I was in there. But she was there, nonetheless. It was a little after midnight. I saw her and hugged her neck. She told me then that I was moving to Asheville again. So here I am, back at my sister's, once again. She had moved to a different part of Asheville, so I wasn't really around all the bad that I was before. And I did good for a little while. I even enrolled back to school for the first time. And I did okay. But then I started getting bored again and started getting into a little bit of trouble here and there. And then I ended up moving up on the Parkway to work. I was up there for a few months, and then I came home. Now, granted, at this time, I am still married. I don't believe I was home even a week before he found me, and I agreed to go talk to him. Well, that talk led to getting back together. And that was probably one of the worst mistakes that I made during that point. Things weren't any better. As a matter of fact, they got worse. Our fighting was worse. The addiction definitely got worse. And in September of that year, I found out I was pregnant with my first child. Immediately, afterward, there was a lot of complications. Still a lot of fighting between he and I. And in October of that year, I started losing him. I was going to court to not only get a divorce, but also to keep him away from me. And I started miscarrying while I was in court. I spent a week, I think, a couple of days in the hospital. And I'll never forget, my oldest sister came in there. She held my hand. She told me that I lost him. It was one of the most devastating experiences I ever had. When I got out, I stayed with her on and off. But I was so devastated that it led me back to drinking very heavily. And they had given me some sedatives or something, to help me cope. And I was definitely abusing them. I would go to my sister's, and I was so bad that I would bring that stuff around my nephews, and they were little. I hate who I was back then because they saw so much that they should not have seen from me. But I was there on and off for a few months, I guess. Um, I briefly went back to Asheville to stay, which was, not a good place because more partying, more everything. But in December of that year, I met somebody who became a big part of my life. And that's what I will talk about in my next video. So thanks for letting me share. Stay tuned, and see you guys later.